When The Rock came back to WWE earlier this year, joining the TKO board of directors and being part of a major main event storyline, a lot of people had some questions about it all. Chief among them being, how would they screw this up? Make no mistake, Dwayne R. Johnson is called the most electrifying man in all of entertainment for a reason. He became one of the hottest main eventers WWE ever saw, then eventually became one of the most in-demand Hollywood stars of our generation. And you don't gain all those accolades by being bad at your job. Even before his debut match in 1996, The Rock was pegged for superstardom and managed to exceed those expectations beyond anyone's wildest imagination. But when it came to wrestling, his journey was anything but perfect. Despite his well-crafted public presentation, the voyage of the SS Rock wasn't without, well, some rocky waters. And it wasn't just his full-time run. Dwayne has spent the better part of the last 2 decades dropping in on WWE to say his catchphrases and, in many cases, completely suck the life out of practically anyone who falls into his orbit. Nobody can touch him. It's like playing make-believe with a neighborhood kid who says he's got an invincibility cloak, or having a clause in all your movie contracts that say you're never allowed to lose a fight. When Cody Rhodes seemed to give his WWE title shot to The Rock after having already won the Royal Rumble just because, it threatened to force a fan rebellion that hadn't been seen since, well, Mania 30. If WWE hadn't read the room and The Rock didn't drop the smiling act and wisely turn heel, I'm not sure we would have had such a favorable opinion of this year's WrestleMania. But at least the company corrected, and The Rock didn't totally dominate the conversation, only partly dominated it. Regardless, it's not the first time The Rock encountered some questionable booking over the years. That's why this week, I'm gonna rank them, my picks for the top 8 worst moments in The Rock's WWE career. But first, let's begin. Number 8, The Rock can't save the Diva search. I'll be honest, a lot of the entries on this countdown aren't really The Rock's fault. Sometimes he is just a passenger, a witness, someone along for the ride on the flaming dumpster hurtling down the steep embankment. And if there's one thing that could be described as such, it was the Raw Diva search. At best, the Diva search was an attempt to capitalize on the TNA madness of the late 90s and early 2000s. At worst, it's yet another example of Vince McMahon's more pervy tendencies hiding in plain sight. Gobs of airtime were taken up each week with ladies in bikinis competing in some of the most inane events imaginable, all for the chance to win a $250,000 contract. It's as dumb as it sounds, but in fairness, they did get a handful of good talent out of it. By 2004, The Rock was officially done as a full-time competitor, but still made the occasional guest appearance over the spring and summer. On an August episode of Raw, the remaining 5 wannabe divas were given the assignment to heap praise on host Jonathan Coachman. Wow, that sounds like some riveting entertainment. Okay, I've seen enough. Let's find out what else is going on Monday night.
Everybody wants it!
You've got one shot, WWE. In came The Rock, back to once again humiliate the coach. Also, just thinking out loud here, but do you think there's a correlation between how skinny The Rock was here and how cold the product was getting? First, Rocky chased Coach out of the ring, then spent the next several minutes riffing and making a lot of weird horn dog noises.
Got a mind of its own.
Finally, The Rock changed the rules like Terry Funk in 2000 and turned the competition into a pie-eating contest. Out came Tajiri of all people with a tray full of pies. Golly, wonder why that casting choice was made. Ooh, did The Rock want to bust out one of his favorite silly voices?
Out of respect for my boy Tajiri, Italian Chinese. Ching bang ding dow.
There he was, The Rock, sweating like Otis in catering, trying desperately to make this very uninteresting segment the opposite of that. It was probably the most anxious and flustered The Rock has ever appeared on camera, until John Cena called him out for having notes on his wrist years later. First up was Joy Giovanni, who tried cutting a promo on fellow contestant Carmella while eating pie in a seductive manner.
Clearly, everybody loved that one.
Up next was Amy Weber, who at least embraced the spirit of the segment. Carmella decided to rub pie all over her arms and chest like a crazy person. Maria Kanellis showed off her talent of touching her nose with her tongue. Then came Christy Hemme, the eventual winner of the whole thing. And if this moment didn't clinch it for her, I don't know what else could have.
As you guys can see, my butt's hungry. It's been munching my panties all night, so I'm gonna have to feed it.
After the first and hopefully only instance of squash cobbling you'll see in wrestling, the coach came back to interrupt the proceedings. What a relief! He and La Resistance put an early hurting on Rock and Tajiri, a moment that makes no sense to anyone too young to have watched this show as it was happening. The coach got his, The Rock uttered his catchphrase, and that was the end of a segment that was flatter than the pie Christie squished with her ass. Needless to say, old Rocky was not called upon to try and save these stupid segments anymore, unless it was for the main event. Number 7. The Roman Rumble. It took only about a decade of trying on WWE's part, but Roman Reigns is now finally a babyface that many fans can get behind. And boy, they tried a lot. Unfortunately for the big dog, he was saddled with the same stigma that hurt John Cena during his time on top. And for that matter, what hurt The Rock during his first year on TV as well. Roman was overpushed and overhyped, and the fans simply refused to accept him as a single star. And nowhere was this more evident than during the 2015 Royal Rumble. After a disappointing Rumble match that saw Daniel Bryan and other favorites taken out early, it became painfully obvious what would happen once it came down to Reigns, Rusev, Big Show, and Kane in the Final Four. All three heels ganged up on Reigns, drawing out The Rock in a surprise appearance to help his cousin. After disposing of the baddies, it was time for Roman and Rock to celebrate in the ring, in front of the traditionally open-minded and non-toxic fans of Philadelphia. I'm just kidding, they shat all over it. The discomfort on Rocky's face was immediately noticeable, especially in contrast with Roman's happy-go-lucky smile. He looked as if he'd rather be on the set of The Tooth Fairy 2. And do you know what's crazy? 1 year earlier at the Rumble, a lot of live fans were really rooting for Roman to win. Mostly because he wasn't Dave Bautista, but the support was still there. But by 2015, the fans had picked their favorites post-Shield breakup, and it sure as heck was not Roman. That's taking creative to a level so bad, not even a sprinkle of rock dust could have saved it. Number 6. The Rock and his blowtorch. On paper, WrestleMania 32 is set to be one of the greatest of all time, until like a third of the roster went down with injuries. Seth Rollins, John Cena, Randy Orton, Bray Wyatt, Luke Harper, Cesaro, and Daniel Bryan were all off the table by the time 100,000 fans descended upon AT&T Stadium in Dallas. So while the previous two Manias appeared to push the company into the future, number 32 relied heavily on folks from the past to give it some extra oomph. We saw Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, and Mick Foley beat up the New Day, and even Shane McMahon came back for the first time in years to try and win his father's love. I mean, beat The Undertaker. Back at Mania 31, it seemed like they were teasing a match between Triple H and Stephanie McMahon versus The Rock and Ronda Rousey. But by this point, the insurers behind Rock's movie career were still hesitant about him getting back into the ring. So, how do you work around it? With smoke and mirrors, baby! Or in this case, fire and fireflies. The fans were treated to a routine by the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders, then, surprise, wake up folks, it's The Rock, and he's got a blowtorch, and he's standing next to a big metal rock sign on stage, and he's setting it on fire. Cool, I guess. Can we just jump ahead to the main event now? We've been sitting here for like 5 hours and this show sucks. The Rock took his sweet time to soak in the cheers and the chants before announcing the record attendance when suddenly, in came the Wyatt family. With Bray and Luke both hurt, that meant the family was relegated to a promo segment in which they got cut down by the People's Champion before The Rock challenged Eric Rowan to a match on the spot. 6 seconds later, he beat Rowan in record-smashing time, then was saved by his old rival in John Cena, who was also recovering from injury. By getting a segment that was 95% talking and 5% match, The Rock had his huge stack of pancakes and ate it too. But it was another bad look for the repeatedly beaten Wyatts and further bogged down what was already a disappointing WrestleMania. Number 5. The Rocky Maivia Super Push. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, WWE has often fallen into the pattern of giving an athlete too much too soon, presenting them in a way that fails to resonate with the fans, resulting in the complete opposite reaction of what they were going for. Well, folks, may I present to you the blueprint. Not Matt Morgan, he's got nothing to do with this. By the fall of 1996, it was clear the WWF needed to find its future and fast. Lucky for them, they had someone who was like wrestling's version of a first-round draft pick. Dwayne Johnson, a former college football star and third-generation wrestler who had literally grown up in the business and rubbed elbows with all the greats. Combining his father and grandfather's names, an idea Dwayne hated for the record, Rocky Maivia was set to debut as part of Mark Marrow's team with the 1996 Survivor Series. The Blue Chipper was hyped for weeks with video packages hyping his pedigree and incredible potential.
And I tell you, it's a feeling of elation right now. I'm so jacked right now. I mean, I could do it right now. I plan on making my own name in the World Wrestling Federation, not getting by on my heritage, but getting by on my unique wrestling style.
Rocky debuted in dominant fashion, pinning both Crush and Goldust to be the sole survivor on his team. And perhaps most surprisingly, the MSG faithful in New York City didn't seem to hate him. Yet anyway, for the next several months, Rocky was positioned as the next best thing since creamed corn. You had Sonny fawning over him and Midcard heels all hating his guts, but through it all, Rocky just kept on smiling and kept on racking up big wins, like in February of 1997 when he upset Hunter Hearst Helmsley to win the Intercontinental Championship. But something about the smiling, high-fiving babyface just wasn't working. It's almost as if the fans were way more interested in the cool heels that were taking over WCW, and that they thought squeaky clean faces like Maivia were totally Squaresville.
Rocky sucks! Rocky sucks! Rocky sucks!
By the time Rocky won the IC title, the tide had already turned on the young star, and the fans made it clear that he was not their guy. The WWF tried to give him a boost at WrestleMania 13 by putting his father Rocky Johnson in his corner and putting him against the Sultan, who was managed by both Bob Backlund and the Iron Sheik. And while this would have packed MSG in maybe 1977, it wasn't going to fly in 97. As the push ran out of steam, Maivia suffered a knee injury that took him out of action for several months. In hindsight, it was probably one of the best timed injuries ever. Once Rocky returned in August, he took all of that hatred against him and turned it into an asset as he turned heel and joined up with the Nation of Domination. Success is all about overcoming adversity, and from this bad booking that would unfortunately be repeated over the decades came one of wrestling's biggest stars. Number 4. Rikishi did it for The Rock. When Steve Austin had to be written off via vehicular assault and take most of the next year to recover from neck surgery, it was unfortunate, but by no means a death blow to the WWF. As luck would have it, The Rock was more than ready to pick up the ball and run with it as the company's #1 babyface, helping to make 2000 one of the best years the Federation ever had. Still, for months, everybody wanted to know who was behind the wheel of that large automobile. All fans really knew at the time was the driver had blonde hair. Could it have been Austin's nemesis, Triple H? What about Billy Gunn, Chris Jericho, Steve's own wife, Deborah? What about Hulk Hogan? In the end, the WWF went with none of those options. What they went with instead was totally out of left field.
I did it for The Rock.
Oh, so you're saying it was the funny dancing guy with the big ass? That's the guy who tried to kill Stone Cold with a car. Boo? After an investigation by Commissioner Mick Foley, it was revealed that The Rock's cousin Rikishi had taken out the rattlesnake. His justification was to take out who he considered to be the Great White Hope, the stars who held down wrestlers of Samoan descent. Simply put, he did not want Rocky to play second fiddle to Austin. Even though The Rock had already been a world champion a couple of times over, and he had main evented a WrestleMania with Steve Austin no less, but you know what? Details schmeetails. Rikishi was sacrificed for a returning Stone Cold at No Mercy, but he still had enough energy to cost The Rock the WWF title against Kurt Angle. The Big Quiche and The Rock crossed paths again at Survivor Series in a lackluster match that was overshadowed by Steve Austin fighting the real mastermind of the car attack, Triple H. A twist, by the way, that made Rikishi's heel turn practically irrelevant. It's almost like Rocky took all those bonsai drops for nothing. Again, The Rock isn't totally responsible for this, it's mostly guilt by association. Still, it can't be overstated just how badly the payoff to this played out, how The Rock could barely elevate his own cousin, and just how shaky the company's creative success was beginning to become. Number 3. Rock Ass Scissors. I wonder if I even need to explain anything after I show this clip.
But my name's Billy. It doesn't matter what your name is.
Well, I can explain a little. In the spring of 1999, Billy Gunn had turned heel and became that year's King of the Ring. After having been a tag team wrestler for so long, maybe this was the time to finally pull the trigger on pushing only one gun. But then Billy hit a wall, or in this case, a rock. It all began on an episode of Sunday Night Heat in July, when The Rock verbally dog-walked Gunn in one of his most memorable promos ever, where he told a story about a high-pitched Billy praying to God, who in this tale happened to be a fan of The Rock's.
Oh dear God, my name's Billy, and I just won King of the Ring, but there's one problem. Everybody still thinks that I absolutely suck. Oh my God, anybody but The Rock, know your role and shut your mouth!
And do you know what Billy had to say about all that afterward? Nothing! Both Gunn and Rocky lost their respective matches at the Fully Loaded pay-per-view 2 weeks later, though their situations were not comparable. Remember, the WWF thought it was more important to protect China than the 1999 King of the Ring winner in that tag match for the rights to DX. The day after the pay-per-view, The Rock challenged Gunn and China to a handicap match, which he won. Whatever threat Billy possibly posed to The Rock had just disintegrated. Then, to undermine the whole feud even further, a certain someone named Chris Jericho debuted by interrupting a Rock promo, only one of the most memorable arrivals in Raw history. Hey, we've already buried Billy 6 feet under before they could even have their one-on-one pay-per-view match, but just to make him even more forgettable, let's bring out this other guy who's not fighting The Rock at SummerSlam, but is a far more interesting character. Hey, wait a minute, where y'all going? Billy and Rocky's SummerSlam encounter became a kiss my ass match where the loser had to pucker up. But in the final twist, Gunn brought out, gasp, a fat lady to the ring and declared that her ass was the one Rock would be kissing. The horror! Of course, there's no way someone as cool and awesome as The Rock could ever suffer such a terrible fate, turning it around on Billy himself before soundly beating him in a 10-minute match. Sadly, Billy didn't have the charisma to withstand The Rock's verbal shellacking, not to mention the booking absolutely failed him. It killed Billy's run as a singles guy, and he went back to teaming with the Road Dogg within a month. But once again, it's hard to pin all this on The Rock. He's not the booker. It's not his fault they did Billy so dirty. Sometimes his star is just so bright, it unfortunately eclipses those around him who aren't strong enough. Which brings me to this. Number 2, The Rock sinks the Midcard. Boy, when you think about it, 99 was not a great year for The Rock or most of his opponents. Sometimes being great comes so easily for people, it's hard to fathom that for others it's a bit more difficult. Sure, The Rock has had great wars with stars like Stone Cold, Triple H, Mankind, The Undertaker, Kurt Angle, John Cena, and Chris Jericho. But anyone below them? Not so much. The burial of Billy Gunn is just one part of a huge trend The Rock has had ever since becoming a top guy. What we saw happen to Mr. Ass happened to other wrestlers like Al Snow, Val Venus, and perhaps most notably the British Bulldog. Oh man, poor Bulldog. It's bad enough that those two only got a 6-minute match on pay-per-view, but after what happened the week before on Raw, it's probably for the best. Honestly, which bump do you think was worse for the Bulldog's career? Fall Brawl 98 or this? Then there was the aforementioned Rikishi feud in 2000, not to mention nearly every other time Rocky has popped in for a quick visit over the years. Christian, the Wyatts, Rusev, La Resistance, The Miz, R-Truth, Daniel Bryan, The Big Show, the list goes on and on. Ideally, it's nice when the big established name can give an up-and-comer the rub, but for most poor souls who were programmed with Rocky, it usually meant their momentum was rubbed right off the face of the earth. Before I give my number 1 pick, here are some electrifying honorable mentions. This Is Your Life, Mick Foley. We all know that spin-offs and sequels are almost never as good as the original, and you would think The Rock of all people would understand that. The original This Is Your Life from a September episode of Raw in 1999, where Mankind tries everything to gain favor with the Great One, is one of the most memorable in WWF history. It drew a massive rating, one of the biggest quarter hours of the entire Monday Night War. 5 years later on the go-home Raw before WrestleMania 20, they decided to try it again with Mick Foley's life on display. But as is often the case, once WWE tries to intentionally replicate the magic of something that happened organically, it doesn't hit the same. same. Rock and Foley's comic chops helped keep things moving in spite of appearances by Jimmy Snuka and a horny old lady. This reboot proved you can't just recapture the feeling simply by going through all the motions of the original. And speaking of sequels, twice in a lifetime. I've mentioned before that the Rock-John Cena feud that spanned 3 WrestleManias ended up pulling in buco business for WWE, so it couldn't have been all that bad. Still, while there were plenty of fun and special moments throughout, the build to their second encounter at Mania 29 reeked of someone overstaying their welcome. From the utter lack of fresh material from the year before, to Rocky ending CM Punk's record reign as WWE Champion for no good reason, to him literally tearing his abs from his body minutes into the match and killing any chance of him wrestling again for another decade, this rematch had all the signs from God of being a bad idea. That damned egg. This was such a stupid piece of business. I've already put it in like 2 or 3 other countdowns since it happened 3 years ago. I already have to retire it after this. Survivor Series 2021, the 25th anniversary of The Rock's debut, Rock not there, prop Egg sent in place of Rock, Egg goes missing, Vince McMahon freaks out, Eggs ends up stolen by Austin Theory and never acknowledged again. God, the fans of today don't know how good they have it! And my pick for the worst moment of The Rock's wrestling career is The Rock destroys Mankind. As I've mentioned in this countdown, a lot of The Rock's worst moments happened to him or around him. He wasn't totally culpable, but with this entry, it was definitely by his own hand. After Mankind defeated The Rock in improbable fashion on the January 4th, '99 episode of Raw, a rematch was soon made for the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Mrs. Foley's baby boy managed to bait a desperate corporate champion into a match under his terms, the dreaded I Quit match. It was actually a brilliant piece of booking. Considering all that Foley had put his body through over the years, what could The Rock have possibly done to compel Mankind to say those 2 little words? The answer to that question came in the match's 3rd act. After brutalizing each other in and out of the ring, The Rock placed handcuffs on Mankind and the real horror began. According to Foley, the original plan was for The Rock to hit him 5 times with the steel chair. Instead, The Rock bludgeoned Mankind with 11 shots. Whether it was adrenaline or missed communication, Foley kept getting up and The Rock kept swinging. At one point, Foley even gives up his back to avoid further damage, but The Rock doesn't take the shot, so Mankind has to turn around again and take another dinger. In storyline, Mankind was screwed out of the title, as a recording from earlier in the night played to suggest he indeed said I quit, though his lifeless body told a very different story. But behind the scenes, the incident took a toll on Rock and Foley's real-life friendship. Mick felt that The Rock had taken liberties and that at the time, he hadn't recognized or properly apologized for how far he took those chair shots. And to make matters worse, the extended violence was on full display for Mick's family, as his wife and kids had to witness their husband and dad suffer some cringeworthy violence that went way further than intended. Obviously, we didn't know then what we do now about head trauma and concussions. There's a reason that shots to the head with chairs are practically forbidden across all of wrestling today, and it's highly unlikely we'll see anything like this ever again. But time hasn't mellowed its impact, as it was just as hard to watch in 1999 as it is in 2024. That's why more than any in-ring segment or unfortunate storyline, I'm picking this as the worst Rock moment of all time. But are there any other not-so-electrifying moments I might have missed? Know your role and let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time if you smell what the influencer is cooking.